So I spent the summer season exploring some of the finest heritage railways in the country. Station buildings like time capsules, frozen in the charm and character of a bygone age. Magnificent locomotives with their polished brass, gleaming steel and billowing clouds of smoke have a presence that's both commanding and comforting. Splendid coaches steeped in history and charm, cosy sanctuaries that invite you to sit back, relax, and savour the romance of rail travel from days gone by. Lovingly restored wagons and freight cars, often overshadowed by the glamour of locomotives and passenger coaches, holding a quiet yet significant place in the story of railway history. Infrastructure and track work, the silent foundations of the railway network, they carry with them the weight of history and the expertise that has kept the trains running smoothly for generations. And the signals, the guardians of the tracks, standing proudly at various points along the journey, guiding the trains safely to their destination. But now the season has ended, the railways are closed and winter has arrived, and so with all this inspiration I thought I would return to my other passion, which is model railways. After all, it's the name of the channel, right? So I guess model railways was going to feature at some point. So as the thumbnail suggests, I'm starting out in O-gauge with a wagon kit. Originally produced by Parkside GWR, they have since been taken over by Peco, who still continue to produce this brand. It's a basic model kit which builds up into a reasonable model. It's not the most detailed of kits, but my modelling interest is more in the painting and weathering, which I find far more captivating. The kit includes metal fine-scale wheels with brass bearings, metal buffers and couplings, and incorporates a compensated axle for smooth running. The instructions are fairly basic and could do with a bigger print. And a set of transfers are also included, with the choice of running numbers and letters depending on what era you are modelling. I firstly removed all the parts from the sprue and cleaned up any moulding lines. I like to use sanding pads for this, although a couple of places required a scalpel. At one end of each of the side frames, the 4 locating pips need to be removed to allow for the compensated axle assembly to operate. The buffer holes need to be drilled out slightly to accept the brass buffer shanks. These are glued from behind and held in place with a brass collar. I use super glue for this. The main floor can now be attached to one of the ends. It is important that this is attached squarely. For all of the plastic construction I use a liquid cement, which can be brushed over the join. It's a very thin liquid that soaks into the join with a capillary action, and the excess glue just evaporates. It actually welds the plastic together and is very strong. Next up is to fit the 4 tiny hinge pins to the sides. Yes, this model has working hinges for the side doors. These are the smallest parts of the kit and were pretty fiddly to cut off the sprue. The side can now be fitted to the base and end assembly, paying a careful attention to the ends which have had the locating pins removed. These should be at the end of the base that has the rocking V moulded into it. I found it necessary to pare away a small section of the stanchions at the floor level to ensure a tight fit to the base. The opposite end piece can now be fitted and we're left with something that's starting to look like a wagon, so you should be getting excited at this point. There are 4 doorposts that need to be added next. Again, they are a little fiddly, but there is a recess that they sit into, so that does help. Onto the 4 doors now, which need the hinges attached to each. Again, I found the most difficult part to be actually cutting these from the sprue. But once done, you can see how the doors will clip onto the hinge pins on the side frames, and the doors can actually operate, which might be good if you wanted to pose the wagon with the doors open in the open position, but I'm going to glue them shut as I intend to put a ballast load inside the wagon. So it's starting to take shape now, and the door hangers can be attached to the chassis under each hinge. I guess these are to stop the doors swinging and banging into the frame when they are opened. I don't know, but it sounds good, right? And now to the underframe, and first I built up the compensated axle unit. This unit holds the wheels and is designed to pivot on the rocking V of the base panel. This can be set aside for now. I attach one of the support pivots to the base and then add the chassis bracing. The W-irons can now be fitted. These line up with the locating pips on the side frames and are glued in place. Now the wheel set can be added and the opposing W-iron attached. Finally, the compensated axle unit can be fitted to the rocking V and the second support pivot added. The axle box covers are now fitted, well at least that's what the instructions are calling them. I'm not so sure, but they hide the gap between the axle boxes and the leaf springs. The final stage is to install the brake rigging, starting with the V-hanger which locates in its own groove on the chassis. So I guess I forgot to drill this hole out to support the brake ratchet. Looking back on the instructions, I was supposed to drill this at the beginning. I mean, I'm blaming the instructions, very small print, but hey ho, it's not a problem to do it now. Next, the main brake assembly and tiny support brackets are fitted to the chassis bracing. Again, this assembly is pretty fiddly to fit, but with the use of some tweezers and a lot of patience, it fits nicely in place. This is followed by the support stretcher and support bearing which slots into the stretcher. The final piece to install is the brake operating lever, which threads its way through the ratchet and locates on the brake assembly pivot. And so that's it, it's all finished. The buffers and couplings I will add after painting, which is the next step. The wagon is firstly given a couple of coats of grey primer. I used an enamel primer from Phoenix Paints, and this is sprayed on with an airbrush. I could have used an aerosol can, but I find they lay down a very thick layer of paint, especially when trying to get to all the little corners and edges. An airbrush is much more controllable and you can finally regulate the flow of paint and where it goes. However, enamel paints are pretty toxic while spraying, so I use a ventilated paint booth and wear a respirator at all times. After the primer is dried, the Wagon was given a couple of coats of black. I like to use rail match weathered black. I think it looks a lot better and the finish really helps with the subsequent weathering. Next, the sides are given a layer of gloss varnish to help fix the transfers. I found that the transfers don't stick very well to matte finishes. And also note that a special thinner is to be used with varnishes. I have used Phoenix varnish and their recommended thinner. Transfer sections are cut out with a sharp knife, then each section soaked in warm water until it starts to slide off the release paper. I soaked the area on the model where the transfers are to be applied, then gently slid the transfers into place. I used kitchen roll to gently swab up the excess water and a very soft brush to press them firmly into place. A cotton bud also works well. I left this section in the water too long and it fell off the release paper completely, but I managed to save it with a little patience and a couple of pairs of tweezers. I also used the little decal fix to hold the transfers in place. This also softens them up a little. Once all the transfers have been applied, it's back to the paint booth for a coat of matte varnish to seal everything in. Now all the painting is finished, the buffers and couplings can be added. The buffers are slid through the buffer shank and a brass collar is glued to the back. A length of spring wire goes through the back of the coupling and is sprung onto the grooves on the back of the buffer collars, giving you sprung buffers and a sprung coupling hook. And so on to the weathering effects. The rail match weathered black already gives a slightly faded look to the black, but I now want to further fade this finish. Looking at photos of the prototypes, the larger flat surfaces appear a much lighter grey. And so to achieve this, I'm using white oil paint. This is literally dabbed on and scrubbed around with a fairly stiff brush. Oil paints can really be manipulated and blended. It's quite a slow process, but you can see the fade starting to appear right before your eyes. I've worked the oil into all the outside panels on the whole of the inside, including the floor, which is not really necessary as I will be fitting a ballast load, but I thought why not. The final result is a nicely faded look, and the weathered black base coat really helps with this finish. I then mixed a very thin down rail match frame dirt, which can be applied as a wash. This is applied to all the underframe and any areas where the dirt would naturally build up. This is followed by a similar grey wash to the upper areas, mostly to dull down the transfers. This is then dry brushed in vertical strokes to achieve a streak finish. So things are now looking pretty grubby, which is the result I wanted to achieve, but things still look a little flat, but the next process really makes things pop, and that is dry brushing with Humbrol metal coat. A flat brush is essential here, and the finish is gradually applied and built up. The more you work it, the more the fine detail starts to really pop, especially all the rivet detail, the wheels and the hard edges. The metal coat really makes things look, well, more metal, so result achieved. Next up is rusting chipping effects, again used in rail match, this time dark rust. Applied with a very small brush to the likely areas where paint would be chipped and rust starts to show through. Again, build it up slowly and keep the chips small. I try my best to keep things random as it's easy to start applying the chips in a pattern. The chips are then toned down a little with a flatty brush and metal coat. The final stage of weathering is to apply dry pigments. I'm using Vallejo's Natural Sienna, Brown Iron Oxide and Old Rust. These are applied with a fairly stiff brush and scrubbed into position on the likely areas where rusty residue would appear. You need to be careful here as once applied it doesn't brush away like other finishes. It looks a little bright here, but after a final spray of matte varnish the colour dies down considerably. I now want to make a ballast load to go in the back. I think open wagons always look better when they actually have something in them. I also want to achieve some additional weight. Being a plastic wagon, it's pretty light and I think some additional weight will help with the running and shunting. So I've made a former using plasticard and foam sheet. These incorporate the weights. The weights are actually stick-on weights used for balancing wheels on automobiles. I picked these up from Amazon and they came in two sizes, 10 gram and 5 gram. I made 3 stacks so it adds up to 45 grams of weight to the wagon. I trimmed all the edges with a scalpel. This is a very messy job, but it achieves the formation of 3 mounds. This is then covered with sculptor mould and further refined and sculpted into shape. Once dry, it's given a grey base coat, and once this is dry, a covering of PVA and a sprinkle of ballast. I then masked up the edges to form a well so that a subsequent layer of ballast can be added. This time the ballast built up in place, soaked with IPA, and then a 50-50 mix of water and PVA. The idea for this method was so that the ballast load could be removable. Problem is, you can see the gap between the ballast load and the inside walls, so I opted to permanently fix the load in place. The gaps can then be filled with additional ballast and fixed, again with watered down PVA mix. Although the ballast would not be weathered in reality, it looked a little too uniform, so I applied some diluted grey in dropper form, then dripped some thinner to spread it out. And the finished result. It's had a final coat of matte varnish to lock everything in place. For a first attempt, I'd have to say that I'm pleased with the results. I have achieved the finish I had hoped for, and it's been a lot of fun to do. Looking back, I certainly think I over-engineered the ballast load. I could have definitely made things easier, but it's all part of the fun, I guess. And so what to do next? Well, I do have a few more of these Parkside wagon kits to build. I also fancy building a locomotive, something small and obviously GWR. I'll have to research and see what's about. And I also think that a small diorama might be fun to build up too, so watch this space for more content. If you've made it this far into the video, then thank you very much for watching. And if you really enjoy the content, then please subscribe to the channel. It would really mean a lot. So until next time, it's goodbye from me.